Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third day of the Nick Fall Conference. And what a conference it's been. We could spend the hour talking about how much fun this has been and connecting with everyone. The new venue, the new format has just been terrific. But we're here today to talk about the importance of market segmentation in the active adult and in the active adult sector. And I'm Susan Barlow, founding partner at Blue Moon Capital Partners, a private equity real estate firm focused exclusively on senior housing. On Monday, we had the Active Adult Investment Panel, and for those of you that were in attendance, they made a very compelling case for the investment case for active adult. And we're today, though, going to focus on the importance of segmenting the consumer and talk about the consumer in detail and also talk about the options and choice that are currently available in the market. Joining me this morning are Bob Kramer. No one needs an introduction or Bob doesn't need an introduction to this group. He is the founder and fellow of Nexus Insights, a thought leadership platform dedicated to the dissemination of ideas and models that challenge the status quo and contribute to the transformation of housing and aging service for older adults. Bob is broadly recognized as one of senior living's most influential and high-profile thought leaders and connectors. Also joining is Dr. Sarah Geber, nation's foremost authority on solo aging. Sarah is a certified retirement coach and author. I just started reading her book, Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers. Sarah is the recipient of the 2018 Influencers in Aging designation awarded by PBS Next Avenue. Ryan Frederick, CEO of SmartLiving 360, focused on helping people thrive in the age of longevity, particularly as it relates to where they live. Within the last several weeks, Ryan has published his first book, Right Place, Right Time. And if you're looking to really understand the active adult consumer, Sarah and Ryan's books are both must-reads. Jake Rothstein, founder and CEO of UpsideHōM, is an age tech entrepreneur and has done quite a bit in the entrepreneurial space in this sector. He's currently founder and CEO of UpsideHōM. UpsideHōM created an alternative for those who want to enjoy the benefits of communal living but aren't ready for an institutional setting by providing a network of apartments in age-diverse communities. Through one point of contact, the company provides billing, maintenance, and a wide variety of non-care support to the residents. So we're going to talk this morning about the consumers and about the products and choice. I'm going to kick it off with the discussion this morning. I guess it's a personal story about the experience with my mother. And me and my siblings are in the baby boomer category. We're going through a lot of the same things that many baby boomers are experiencing with their parents. And it's really influencing, our own experiences are influencing the way that we look at options for ourselves, either currently as we move into active adults or as aging into more traditional senior housing. So my mother started about 5 years ago in active adult. She aged into independent living, assisted living. She, over the last year, has been in and out of the hospital for rehab and hospitalizations and rehab. So the last year has been an intensive senior housing experience for our family. And As my siblings and I have been dealing with the experience, it's really influenced kind of what we think. And I would say especially for my brother, in that this is very consistent with what the senior housing, with what other baby boomers are looking at. They're focusing now as what can I do physical, health-wise, preserve my health, take care of myself. In my brother's case, get 2 knee replacements, work out like a maniac, and travel all over the Western United States to find his next place to live the next chapter of his life. So my mother has done well. As you can see from the picture, this is a picture. She won the Kentucky Derby hat decorating contest. So she's thriving in senior housing, but I can tell you that my brother is thinking, what can I do to make sure I don't get put into senior housing? And that is kind of what we're dealing with the baby boomers. But move over. She is thriving, and as we're now going to talk about the baby boomers and go into more detail about what those baby boomers want. They are the consumer for active adult. As they said on Monday, the age is 70 to 75 for active adult. That's the leading edge of the baby boomers. They're going to influence our sector for the next several decades, and especially in the active adult space. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob to really define the consumer and talk more about that group.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Appreciate it. I'm going to stand up. Those of you that know me, it's hard for me to sit and talk at the same time. So it's great to be here and great to be able to discuss this topic with you. I think, first of all, we're really talking about and the way I like to describe it is this is the non-care driven market for older adults. And that's key. As increasingly independent living, assisted living, memory care, really a care driven market. And very much therefore of a push market where you are pushed out of your home, out of usually necessity. As opposed, and what I want to talk about is a pull market, an attraction market. So first of all, as we think about that, just in terms of age range here, just to looking at the 65 to 84 population, and if you look at this, the point is that the real growth in terms of numbers, the huge growth coming, if you look at between now and 2030, is happening in this age cohort of 65 to 84, as opposed to 85 plus. And when you look there, I mean, you see, huge numbers coming. This is additive growth. This is not total growth. This is how many additional folks will be in this age group. And at 2030, the oldest boomer in 2030 is going to be 84. The youngest boomer is going to be 66. So literally, they frame that entire age cohort of 65 to 85 at the time of 2030. So that's who we're talking about. At the same time, it's really important to realize that you're also going to have folks that'll be 60 or 65, and others will be 95. And part of that is it's dangerous to rely too much just on chronological age. Those that talk about and study aging knowing that there's chronological age, then there's physiological, or what others, and functional age. In other words, how you function physiologically, how your body systems how they have handled aging. And then lastly, there's attitudinal age. And, you know, I was struck by a comment by Governor Mark Parkinson yesterday morning on the panel when he talked about one of the problems that assisted living and the whole private pay senior living sector has had on Capitol Hill is that all the policymakers see those ads of those couples in golf carts, and they say, what do you mean? You know, why do you need assistance during this time of COVID? And that's because we're marketing in all those things based on attitudinal age. So we're marketing to people who are 15 years older usually than the models because of attitudinal age and people thinking of themselves more like that person. But when you're trying to lobby on the Hill, you then have Mark saying, gosh, we got to get people into our communities, and David saying, and James, you know, because they've got to see basically how frail our residents are. But in our marketing, we don't market frailty. And that's been a contradiction then when we've come suddenly into the policy sphere. So chronological age, physiological, functional, attitudinal. Now, another reason that it's important to sort of talk about this as non-care-driven seniors housing. There's a statement I've heard many times over the last 48 hours that the boomers are finally here, that the demographic wind is at our back. Well, if you're in this session, for what we're talking about, that's true. If you're in care-driven seniors housing, I have an unfortunate piece of news for you. And that is that the boomers are 10 to 15 years away on average from being your customer. So if you're gearing up for the boomers in a care-driven product, you've got a mismatch, or you've got a long wait time. I hope you have very patient capital. But, so there's a little-known study that I want to call your attention to that NIC did. It's on the NIC website under research. It's called Rethinking Demand, Considering a Life Expectancy Perspective. And that study looks at, rather than traditional demand that's looking at age qualified, 75, 80, 85, or income qualified, this looks at it by life expectancy, with the thesis being that this industry, other than entrance fee CCRCs, primarily cares for people in the last 5 years of their lives. So statistically, what does that mean? Well, as of 2018, for a male, the period at which they fell under 5 years of life expectancy is 88. For women, it's 90. Now, what does that mean? Well, what that means is that you suddenly have, if you're looking at 75 plus, so you have 19.8 million projected in terms of growth for 2030. And if you look at men, you have about 15 million. But when you suddenly look at this instead by life expectancy, and so therefore you look at 88 for men and you look at 90 for women, you suddenly, that market goes for women from 19.8 to 2.2 million. That's a loss basically of 89% of that cohort. And for women, men, you go from 14.7 million to 1.9 million. That's a loss. You have 13% of that projected market. So again, we're here to talk about what's going to attract folks in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's not a care-driven product. It's not framed around that. But just as importantly, it's not actually implicitly based on all the assumptions that have woven their way, almost like osmosis at times, into a care-driven product. So what I'm saying, therefore, is boomers are not customers for the most part, and there are obviously outlier exceptions, for that care-driven product. So the next question that then becomes, and this is just a slide that just shows you again those life expectancy projections. So you see the difference again between if you do it at 75 plus, 80 plus, or you do it in terms of for men 88 and women for 90. And this just shows you the contrast. This is just a visual way of looking at what I've just talked about with you. But now let's talk about the next question. The first question is, we've just been talking about who's the customer, all right? The second question is, what can they afford? And NIC did the well-known now study, coining the phrase, the forgotten middle, and we looked at those. There's going to be a session on that immediately coming up later this morning. So there's, compelling numbers here, both about the growth of the a forgotten middle cohort, which is going to grow hugely between now and 2029, which was the out projection year at that time, but also of the upper income cohort. But if we redid that study today or in 2022, those numbers are going to be very different. Why? And I think it comes down to one key driver, labor, and the costs of labor. And the costs of labor, I think, from what I'm hearing, most operators, particularly that serve that upper income cohort, they're going to be trying to, and they're going to be needing to put through upper single-digit price increases in 2022, and I don't think that'll be a one-time thing. My guess is we're going to see 7, 8, up to 10% increases both in 2022 and in 2023. I won't project for after that. What does that mean? It means that the size of, again, of that market just shrunk and more people fell into that middle, not being able to afford that care-driven product. And, you know, these trends also reinforce each other because the more you climb up the income scale, you're getting basically health and longevity in this country is driven more than anything by education, which then drives income, which then drives health status. And so the more you are targeting an upper market, the more you are targeting a market that's highly educated, has therefore that large amount of income, but they also have a longer lifespan. And that means they also are going to be able to delay longer their need. So that wealthy boomer may be your customer at 92 for a care-driven product, not at 82. So, but this issue of affordability, I think, is going to be key. We're not talking about that. That's the focus of the next session. But with the shift in pensions, the concerns about Social Security, this middle-income cohort, and the way I would put it is, for many, there are two key desires that they're starting to think about as boomers. And I reflect back on Susan's experience and on her siblings' experience, her brother's experience. And that is, they would like to see just having longevity without having health and without having the dollars to support yourself is often seen as a drag, not a plus. And so for boomers, it's critical. Can my health span match my lifespan? And can my wealth span basically also track with my health span and my lifespan? So, okay, what are they looking for? So, you know, the first thing I want to, just in my last couple of minutes, I want to touch on two things. One, how different and why are they different are these consumers from prior generations? It's not just simply because they're boomers. So I don't want to focus on the word boomer, but I want to focus on this is the first generation that has both experienced their parents living much longer than their parents or than they, the kids, expected. But, and this but is key, at the same time, with the traditional caregiver, the adult daughter, now being in the workforce. And hence the growth of our industry. Assisted living took off because of boomer women who couldn't live with the guilt of putting mom in a nursing home, but then along came assisted living with its carpets, its chandeliers, its curved staircases, and so forth, marketing to those boomer women, and assisted living took off in the 90s. So, but the point is, as Susan shared, that for many boomers, their experience with senior living is they want to figure out now, what do I have to do so that I don't end up in senior living, or worse, the very common phrase, used all the time, I had to put my mom, I had to put my dad into assisted living. And that phrase by itself speaks volumes. It's a loss of independent agency, and it's something that for boomers is something they want to do everything they can to avoid. So what that means is that for boomers, this is very much a choice, but it's also a lifestyle choice, and it's a lifestyle choice framed on their experience of their parents and how they have dealt with our industry and senior living. It's not that they haven't been grateful for our industry. That's not the point. And incredibly grateful at times that there is a safe place for mom or for dad. But the point is, does that mean that's what they want for themselves? So what are they looking for? And let me just say, I recommend to all of you, if you haven't done it, look up Frameworks Institute and look up their research on words like senior, senior citizen, senior living. You may rethink some of your word choices after you do that research, which is very comprehensive research. It's gone on for more than 10 years now, basically on boomers and their attitudes towards common terminology that we use to describe the older adult market. So what are they looking for? A series of things. One, I'd call it avoidance. I've already talked about this. Not being put into senior living. Secondly, I'm going to go through these briefly because of time. Health. An extended health span that avoids the continuum to the greatest extent possible. Note that avoids the continuum. If you position an active adult or a product that's going to appeal to boomers as the first step on the continuum, you've already lost the game. Because for the boomers, it's they may be unrealistic, but it's how do I avoid getting on that continuum, because the continuum is seen as a continuum of decline and a continuum of irrelevance. And how do I avoid that? So just seeing this as an earlier on-ramp to senior living is the exact wrong way to look at it. It may work for yesterday's customer. It will not work for tomorrow's customer. Thirdly, then purpose. Experiences that make life worth living. I would frame this around the concept of the next 8,000 days that was first coined by Joe Coughlin at MIT. Basically, we have a revolutionary moment, and a moment that boomers are going to be the first group that really wants to take advantage of, and that is 8,000 days from 22 to 44, 8,000 days from 44 to 66, and 8,000 days from 66 to 88. And in those 8,000 days, boomers want to figure out, what do I do with this next chapter of my life? How do I live this next chapter of my life? And they're going to be looking for places and for activities and for programs that are really going to help them repurpose themselves and live with a sense of satisfaction and purpose those next 8,000 days. So that's connecting with a sense of passion and purpose. But the next thing they're also looking for, I call it navigation. Now, this is more than just concierge. It's, yes, doing away with the worries about, but it's not just the tech concierge or the lifestyle concierge in terms of getting you tickets or teeing you up for a woodworking class. It's much more than that. It's life navigation. My point would be that folks that are entering this new stage, oftentimes entering it now single, whereas before they weren't, or with close friends, and maybe they've lost those friends. They need new skills to navigate the journey in this new period of life. And those that are providing those skill sets, examples. A story I heard recently of a gentleman who was 82, his health was failing, his diet was terrible, and it turned out what turned him around was his basically learning to cook, because he'd lost his wife, he'd totally depended on his wife, he didn't know how to do a thing in the kitchen, and as a result, he was now just eating junk food all the time. And so this health plan, and I learned this from a health plan, paid for this fellow to take a cooking class, and it revolutionized his life, and it dramatically improved his health. That's a life skill. And many people are entering this phase without the life skills. And what they're looking for in terms of your marketing is, this is a period of growth, not deficits. This is not an extended period of decline. What a drag. No, this is a new period of opportunities to learn new things, learn new skills, contribute in new ways. I hope you're getting a sense this is a different paradigm. And if we don't take advantage of this, as you're going to hear from Ryan and from Jake, we'll be disrupted right out of this sector by others who will get it. So, and then lastly, or next to last, autonomy. They're looking for, they want to have the perception of independent agency and choice. And so that's critical. That means no bundles. That means, yes, even though they're difficult decisions you know they're going to have to make, that you're giving them choice to make those, rather than saying you get all this in a bundle. And then lastly, basically, this is it's personalized lifestyle and experiences. The role of data in this is going to be key, but it's anything but one size fits all. And ultimately, therefore, we're talking about, in many instances, niche products marketed in a targeted way to niche audiences with real understanding of the psychographics and willingness and ability to pay of that audience. So now Sarah's going to talk about a little bit more from her experience interacting with thousands of consumers of this age. What are they looking for out of life? And therefore, what are they looking for out of the settings and places they might call home? Sarah?
Thanks, Bob. Thank you. I am really happy to be in front of this audience today because I want to talk to you about community. And my experience of community was really brought to a head during COVID, as I'm sure lots of yours was also. But I had an opportunity to experience it firsthand and very emotionally when one morning I was reading the paper and I saw a story about a guy who lived in the next town over from us, and that's Petaluma for those of you who are familiar with California geography. And this guy was going out on his deck every night and howling. We were probably, 60 or 80 days into the lockdown in California, and people were feeling stressed. And he was howling like a wolf does when they want to attract a mate or when they want to just announce the fact that they're there to the other wolves, or maybe they're lonely. Well, when I read this article in the paper, I thought, cool, I could do that. So I dragged my husband out that night, and we went into the middle of our cul-de-sac, and we howled, ow, ow, and out came the neighbors to see who the nutcases were that were howling. And pretty soon they were howling too, just like happened in Petaluma. And our howling turned into conversations, which turned into potluck dinners, which turned into movie night, and we rigged up outdoor movie theaters and were able to socially distance way before masks. And I was so happy. I had been looking at little squares on a screen all day, and this was real flesh and blood people. And this was my community. This was my real life community. So to me, that is an important aspect of what boomers are going to want. And it fits into the whole picture of what Bob is talking about. Now, I can't expand very much and very eloquently upon what Bob told you about boomers. But what I do want to say is what boomers have right now in the way of choice, in the way of independence, in the way of the ability to pursue their passions, the ability to build relationships, they're not going to want to give that up for all the reasons that Bob talked about. But I want to drill down today on a particular segment of the boomer population that I think is pretty important. And the way I discovered this segment was, probably 10 years ago now, I was having a glass of wine with my friend Sandy at one of those cute little wine bars in Silicon Valley where I lived at that time. And she was regaling me with stories of how she had to fly to the East Coast 3 and 4 times a year to take care of her aging mother, who was then about 90. And with every year that went by, there were more demands on her. And I said, yeah, I know. I'm getting this from other people, too. I have one friend that had to actually take a leave of absence from his job and go live in Texas with his aging father for, I don't know, I think it was 6 months. Well, I looked at Sandy and I said, you know, you and I don't have children. Who's going to do that for us? And that launched me on a 10-year journey of exploring solo agers. Now, people without children are not the only solo agers. As you can see on this chart, solo agers come in all kinds of different varieties, and they get there in different ways. But by far the largest group of these solo agers are people who don't have kids. And 2 months ago, the US Census Bureau did me a huge favor. They issued a report on childlessness in older adults. And they found some really interesting statistics that I'm going to share with you today. If you look at this chart, you'll see on the right-hand side that people in the older generation, older than 75, older than the boomers, had about 10%, maybe 11% childlessness. And my research tells me that that has been true throughout time, that typically our culture produces about 10% childlessness in any generation. But look what happened when the baby boomers came along. The early baby boomers had around 15%, maybe 16% childlessness. And the later boomers were bumping up around 19%. Now think about that. That's 1 in 5 boomers that don't have kids. Now here's some other interesting stuff that the Census Bureau dredged up that I thought would be pretty interesting to this audience, sure. Childless people are better educated. Hence, they probably have made more money over the course of their lives. More childless people have a bachelor's degree or higher, and fewer childless have only a high school degree or maybe not even that. In addition, many childless people live alone. Far more people who are childless live alone than their parent counterparts, for lots of reasons. But the fact is, they're living alone. Now, once again, boomers living alone are fine right now. They're happy, they've got lives, they work, or maybe they have retired, but they've got hobbies, they've got volunteer options, they've got all kinds of things going for them. And the most important thing that they have going for them is that they have already built a community. Whether it includes family or not, most of these boomers have built a social network that is inclusive of friends, family, people they know from their church or synagogue, people that they share their lives with. And for some, that's been a building a family of choice. Now, if we can offer those boomers an opportunity to maintain those communities or build new ones in the senior housing that you create over the next 10 years, you'll attract them. I went with a group of women not too long ago to look at several life plan communities. And you know what their questions were? They weren't about how well you're going to care for me or what happens if I have a medical emergency. They were about their friends. They were about what kind of opportunities am I going to have here? What kind of opportunities are you going to provide me to build community, to remain active, to pursue my hobbies, to pursue my work? I ran into one 82-year-old woman at a community that I consider very progressive in this area. She was 82. she's a physical therapist. She's still working. She's been living in that community for 12 years, and she works out of that community. She goes to see people outside, and people come to her. So these are the opportunities people are going to want to have to continue their lives, to continue to have their communities. So when you think about the future and what you're going to develop, think about these solo agers, because they're going to be prominent, and they're going to need senior housing of some sort. But it better appeal to the lives that they live today, and it better make sense for them to move there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, who's going to talk about some of the really cool options that are going on right now.
Thank you, Sarah. Good to see everyone here this morning. I'm curious to do that same experiment of howling in our neighborhood. I'll let you know how that goes. A couple things I want to share with you, but before I do that, I want to push on a couple ideas that came up earlier. Active adult is a product type. It's not a consumer. I'm going to repeat that. Active adult, as it's been talked about so far, is a product, not a consumer. Many people I know they may be active adults, but they don't consider them active adults. The other piece I want to mention is we've heard from some boomers here this morning. I'm a Gen Xer. A lot of the discussion really is more about psychographics than particular generations. It's how people think. And we have people that think in these terms that actually are part of the silent generation, people that are actively in potentially this segment. And when you look at Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Z, which I have several, it's about how they think. So we need to be careful about these broad-based generational assumptions. Again, it's how people think and therefore how they behave. I'll be brief here, but I have two main ideas I want to share with you. Susan mentioned earlier, I recently wrote a book. It wasn't part of the master plan, but it happened. I'm glad I did it. And the book, it's a consumer book called Right Place, Right Time, and it helps people understand why place matters so much in the context of healthy aging. It also helps me understand that there's a world much larger than senior housing, which I'm going to talk about. But on the first piece around this formula for successful aging, just as a reminder, because it's critical that we understand this as investors, developers, and operators, it has little to do with our DNA. Only about 30% of our longevity is linked to our DNA. It's much more about lifestyle and environment. Do you have purpose, as Bob described earlier? As an anecdote, people with a purpose that's greater than themselves, they're 2.5 times less likely to get dementia. It's social connection, as Sarah just alluded to. It's physical activity, it's financial well-being, and it's the role of a place. And place has a huge impact on the outcomes of our life. That matters whether we're technically a senior or at other stages in life. So in many respects, what we build and create can have an enormous impact on the outcomes and the life of the people that are in our communities. That is the big answer that in some cases we're blind to, although it's in plain sight. Second thing I want to talk about, and this is a huge issue, so I want to emphasize it, is you have a question whether you're a developer, operator, investor. Are you in the senior housing business, or are you in the business of creating places for older adults to thrive? Again, I'm going to repeat that. Are you in the senior housing business, or are you in the business of creating great places and with services to help people thrive? I've been in this field about 15 years as an investor, operator, consultant, a bunch of different roles. I have found that we treat historically these products as commodities. There's IL, there's AL, there's memory care. In reality, there's many, many more options. And consistent with what Bob shared, as we create these new options, they can be far more compelling than what we have today. Even if you decide you're not necessarily in the business of housing and services for older adults and you find yourself in the senior living business, you have to be very aware of the changing competitive set that's happening. And Jake's going to share with you an example in just a moment of how that's shifting. But I want to share some examples right now of what are some of these options. So the first one here, the age-restricted multifamily, this is what today we're describing as active adult. Okay? I'm going to share with you that this is just a sliver of the options that are out there. But this is getting a lot of attention in part because Carlyle and some other investors made a proactive decision to invest not in senior housing, but in housing for older adults. They recognized there was a gap. You have age-friendly multifamily. Can we create better communities for people to thrive that aren't necessarily defined by age? This is a project that I helped develop with a public company where we basically created a multifamily project, but thought about how could we help people of all ages thrive there. We incorporated universal design, we created elements to build community, we coordinate services for people at a price point that's quite attractive relative to other options. But that's not it. How about age-restricted for sale, and I'll emphasize rental single-family housing. You know, one of the impacts of the pandemic in part is we recognize having your own private space, pretty desirable. In some cases, we expect people to downsize from these homes into smaller apartments, not fully appreciating what's involved, and even if that's a desire. So you're seeing a growth more broadly, as many of you know, on rental single-family housing. But how about housing that is thoughtful about how it works across the full age continuum? And then you hear about accessible dwelling units, the idea of dropping in separate spaces that may be adjacent to where family lives. I've seen this happen a lot within my circles. I live in Austin, Texas, and there's ordinances that are making that easier to happen now. So there's an opportunity where you have family in their own space, and then you're close to them. You can be there as necessary. In some cases where people move into the accessible dwelling unit and maybe other family moves into the main house. And then pocket neighborhoods and co-housing, things in design that help facilitate the sense of community by design, where it's easier to know your neighbor, where perhaps you can know your neighbor without necessarily howling, as Sarah described earlier. And then home sharing. This idea that you have spaces within your existing single-family house or even apartment or condo where can it be made easier to identify people that then not only you could become friends with as roommates, but also help your financial well-being. As Bob alluded to earlier, as we think about living to 100, that's a new paradigm. How do we think about not only our net worth, but just managing our income and expenses? And then multi-generational housing. Groups like Lennar, other home builders are specifically building places where you have the expectation that's multi-generational. It could be kids that come back after college, but also it could be older parents that are part of your environment. So you have separate spaces, but then there's common spaces. Again, another option. And then there's multi-generational housing more broadly. How can we create these spaces where it truly works for people of all ages? You might have certain instances where there is an age restriction or for whatever reason it's designed with older people in one neighborhood, but the idea is all integrated. I mean, there's a big school of thinking, particularly outside of NIC, where people don't want to be segregated by age. Some people describe it as age apartheid. There's more that we can do to create these natural interactions, which is what we had for generations. It's only recently that we've created some of these environments. So with that, I'm going to pass the presentation to Jake, who's going to give you an example of one of these new models that you either can consider to be part of, as whether you're in the business of housing for older adults, or if you're in the business for senior living, you have to recognize this is a real competition, a real competitor, and what is your value proposition as the landscape changes? You go, Jake.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to sit because I'm going to pace back and forth if I don't. So, really good to be here, everybody. So I'm going to start with a story. This is a personal story, and this is what drove me into the industry. 2014 or so, my grandfather was diagnosed with dementia, pretty serious. My grandmother, who was 82 at the time, was caring for him, trying to care for him, and it was really challenging. He wound up after a year or so of her being burdened with that insurmountable task, and then it continued to get worse. Moved into a really fantastic assisted living community, quickly realized that that wasn't going to be enough care, moved into a really fantastic memory care community where he soon passed away after that. And now, my grandmother, who was 86 or 87 at this time, found herself alone for the first time in her whole life. And she lived in this big house with him, and now she was alone in this big house with stairs. And she had recently had knee replacement surgery, and she couldn't walk up those stairs anymore. And she was coming to me and to our family members for basic things. She didn't like driving at night. She didn't like driving outside a 3-mile radius. She couldn't go to the grocery store by herself because she couldn't carry that 24-pack of water bottles off the shelf and put it into her cart. It was just too much for her. But she didn't need care. She didn't need someone helping her bathe or shower or eat. And so we didn't think about traditional senior living for her at the time. But what we did do is we moved her into a smaller apartment in a neighborhood that she knew and loved. She wanted to be close to her friends and to her doctors and to her Walgreens. And it was really important that she stayed in the community that she knew. And so we sold her house. We got her this apartment. And I essentially acted as her, what we're calling now, a home manager. And I was this, I think Bob referred to it as sort of like a life navigator. She needed help paying her rent. So I would, for whatever reason, she liked to go to the bank first, probably for social engagement. And I would go with her to the bank because it was a little bit farther away. And so I'd pay her rent with her every month and might help her go to the grocery store and things like that. It's really IADL type of services, even for an 87-year-old at this point who was a very healthy ager comparatively. And so we said, well, there must be a lot of people out there like my grandmother that are either not ready for an institutional setting. She saw what her husband just went through with that, and she just didn't want that for herself, or not, at least not yet. She didn't need it yet, certainly. But she needed a sense of community. She needed some support, some basic supportive type of services. And she couldn't even, the reality is she couldn't afford traditional senior living that met her standards of living that she was used to living. So that led us to the founding. It's an important story because it led us to the founding of our company, UpsideHōM, which is a platform that connects people like my grandmother and like my parents who were helping my grandmother through this period of time. Connects them to quality housing. It connects them to services and bundles those services around that quality housing that's pre-selected and pre-vetted by us in order to give her a tremendous amount of flexibility and a lot of optionality. And we do it all using technology to make the whole thing really seamless, to drive efficiency, and to create an incredible experience. And so there's 3 points that I want to make around this sort of story. Technology. I think we use the term technology a lot. We throw tech here, tech there. We're buying software for our communities as operators to try and drive efficiencies in the business. But the reality is I think that we're overlooking the most important thing that technology can do for us, and that is to create an incredible experience for our residents and for our family members. And so, we can buy technology to drive efficiencies on the back end and shave a couple of points, or add a couple of points to margins. But the reality is if you're not delighting customers, you're not using technology to delight your customers, whether that's putting an app in front of them, and in a lot of cases that's not the right way to do it, or whether it's using that great technology to help your staff and your team members execute on the things that are really going to be important to delighting those residents, that's how really we want to, that's how we're thinking about it. Really, I think it's oversimplified. Oh, we need an app. We need a resident app for them to actively engage in the community, or we need something that an iPad in everyone's apartment in order for them to order room service or whatever it might be. And I think that's an oversimplification of the potential that technology has to really drive meaningful experiences, positive experiences for residents. The second thing I'll mention is this choice, this optionality, and Bob alluded to it as well. The people that are coming to us are really particular. They want very specific things, and our ability to offer those is really important to our residents and to our prospects. People come to us and they say, well, I want a covered patio. I want a screened-in patio. It's an absolute must that I have to have a screened-in patio. And I want to be within a 2-mile radius of my daughter because I'm just moving to Florida and my daughter's in Florida and I got to be in this location. And so we're able to, because we have a whole host of communities in a geography, we're able to place those people in the places that they're, in the places that they're desiring, and they desire places for a variety of reasons. They want to be close to their Walgreens, and they want to be close to their grandchildren, and they want to be close to their friends. And what we're seeing a lot is people migrating to be close to their children as they age. And it's typically due to some sort of triggering event, which everyone in this room, I'm sure, deals with daily. So there's the people that are looking for our solution because they want to change, and then there's the people looking for our solution because they need to make a change. Because of we call them the 5 Ds. It's death, disability, divorce, downsizing, and the fifth one's escaping me now. But the reality is that all of our residents are falling into one of those buckets. but it's sort of matched with a desire to have this flexible option for themselves as they continue to progress into age. And the third thing is this flexibility. We really are emphasizing that because of the proliferation of the gig economy and technology-enabled services, we can offer a tremendous amount of flexibility to our residents in the comfort of their own fully managed apartments. So if they need food, they can pay for food. But if they don't need food, they don't have to pay for food. And if they need transportation because they don't drive anymore, they can order transportation through us. If they still drive, they don't need to order transportation, and they don't need to pay for that transportation if they're not using it. So flexibility is really important, and the bucketing of the groupings of older adults into categories for us has been incredibly challenging. I don't know what the answer is to that. We're finding that people that are 60 are finding this option attractive, and people that are 87 are finding this option attractive. And they're at varying levels of acuity. We have 67-year-olds that are way higher acuity than the 95-year-olds or the 87-year-olds that are living with us. And so from a marketing standpoint, from a messaging standpoint, I think it's an ever-evolving challenge to attract such a wide variety of people that are finding value in this type of solution. But I think we have to be very aware and conscious of the way we group people and the way we bucket, people. There is no one size fits all. There is no a 65 to 85-year-old person is going to need this specific set of things, and this is what we have to deliver as a package. I think those days are sort of over, and we have to really think about how we can be flexible, how we can offer really customized and individualized services and support to older adults as they age. But yeah, that's basically what we're doing in a nutshell. And yeah.
Good. Well, before we turn to questions, I just want to wrap up in the sense of what does this mean for you as an investor, as a developer, as an operator or manager? And just sort of emphasize a few themes that I hope you've heard. I think the first thing is that I would say your lens, both to understand your potential customer and to understand your competition, is going to have to be much wider than it has traditionally been in the senior housing and care industry. And so we're not just simply talking about, oh, this is adding a new entry ramp to the senior living continuum. This is so exciting, I'll get them earlier. Or it's just, this is just age-restricted multifamily, and it's wonderful because I only have 5 to 8 FTEs, and gee, this is going to be great in a time when labor is so expensive. And I think thinking about that, there are a couple of key things. One, your wider lens is you may be viewing that you're in the senior housing business, but your competition includes tons of other people that are basically trying to take advantage of providing places and experiences where older adults can thrive. And they're your competition, not just simply staying in the single-family home or moving into a senior living community. And with that, I would say this is an excited, optimistic panel in the sense that there are a ton of these folks out there. And it's a very, very broad demand pool. But I hope one of the messages that's come across is that because it's very personalized, very particular, very much about the psychographics and the willingness as well as ability to pay, it's also going to have to be successful, highly segmented, highly niche. So it may be very broad, but it may be very thin in terms of how deep it is for the particular product you come up with. And I'll just give an example of an announcement that Atria and Related made earlier this week. You know, a very high-end product. I'm not talking about this necessarily as active adult, though it's definitely lifestyle. Their coterie product, they called it. Very, and I think a lot of brilliant parts to it. But my prediction would be if 4 other people try and go into the markets they're in with that brand, at least 3, if not 4, will fail, even though they may be very successful. Why? Because though they have identified a niche, that niche is not very deep. And so again, understanding your customer and their psychographics and their ability to willingness to pay, and understand, given what the customer wants, what's the competition? It's not just the single family home, and it's not just other senior living providers or other active adult providers. And this comes down to a point I'll close with on this, and that is Ryan's opening point, that active adult is a product, but it's not a consumer. Ultimately, this is about what the consumer's looking for and how they view themselves and what they want. And that speaks to what Sarah said, that speaks to the example and what Jake is doing. So with that, Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions.
Great, thank you. Very interesting, and I think the Monday investment panel made it seem so easy, and you guys have made it seem a little more complicated. But why don't we start? Let's start with the complications. Ryan, the risks of building supply in a market with segmented tastes. This is, we've got lenders, equity, operators, developers here. What are the risks?
Well, I think that Bob nailed it moments ago. Just our world is way more complicated than I think the way the industry has handled this a decade or so ago, where we had more of a homogeneous population, where there were few options. I mean, I think back to, like Bob mentioned earlier, how assisted living started. Well, there was really nothing between a single family home and skilled nursing. It was an obvious, clear need that the industry was able to provide. Today, it's just a lot more complicated, Susan. I think that you have all these different tastes, like was mentioned earlier, and therefore, as Jake alludes to, we're starting to see a disaggregation of place and the set of services you may need. So there's a lot more alternatives for people, even the single-family home. This idea of aging in place, which really should be aging in the right place, but that's a separate conversation. But you can see there's many more options for people to have. So it has to be a compelling why to go in. And so I think the amount of research and learning, I mean, you even did hear this the other day for the active adult panel. Maybe it seems cleaner, like simpler than it really is, but I think there was also an illusion of the fact that there was a lot of trial and error. And I think we're now in a chapter for this field, particularly if you define the field as housing for older adults, not senior living, that you're going to see a lot of trial and error, and some are really going to work. But you got to do it well, and you got to know your niche. So I think the risk of missing here is much greater than it was in the past. But if you do get your niche, you do it really well, that can be a really exciting business and a way to positively impact people's lives.
Yeah, and Jake, what role will technology play in this as we go forward? There's a lot of talk about it, age tech, a lot of interest, but how will this really unfold from yours?
From our perspective, technology is fundamental to all of this, to making all of these disparate pieces of a puzzle, of a disaggregated puzzle, work together in harmony and to create a really incredible end experience for the older adult. That's not necessarily to say that the older adult is going to be the one interacting and engaging with the technology directly, but using technology to create that end user experience. Whether that end user is comfortable texting or emailing or phone calling doesn't really matter. It's what that technology can enable in terms of leverage, in terms of experience, in terms of overall efficiency. But yeah, it's not necessarily a mobile app. A mobile app is not going to save the world here. We have to be more thoughtful about what really it means to use technology to drive meaningful engagement and meaningful experience. So I think that technology is absolutely fundamental to the future of quality of life for older adults. But we have to really be thoughtful about how we think about that.
Yeah. Sarah, on solo agers profiling, it seems like I've heard someplace that maybe 70% are single women. Can you give us more perspective on what the demographic looks like for solo agers?
Yeah, 70% are single women at a certain age, and I don't know where that kind of picks up. Mm-hmm. But solo agers are looking for a lifestyle that they have had. They're looking to continue a lifestyle that can fit very well into aggregate living if it's presented in such a way that solo agers are comfortable.
And are there any models that you're aware of out there that you think really are exemplary on that front? Or have you seen any?
I have seen a few. Living in California, and I've talked to a number of you out there this week, living in California, it's a tough go for developers in that state. The regulations are stringent and the property values are really high. So it's hard to build something unique in California, but I'm seeing it elsewhere. When properties can be built in such a way that you have kind of small neighborhoods in some way, that's so much more conducive to building community than simply a high-rise. And for people who have lived on the ground all their lives, their idea of happiness usually doesn't revolve around an apartment on the 9th floor of a pink palace somewhere on the outskirts of a suburb. So solo agers are no different than other baby boomers in that regard, to the extent that a solo ager looks at a property and says, I can build community here. I can see myself here. I can see myself as part of this. That's going to make all the difference.
I want to add one thing too, and that is, though the percentages in terms of women versus men, women living longer, single women being the preponderant percentage, that's true. If you took a close look, maybe not have had a chance to, at some of the slides I showed, that's changing. And men are living longer. And actually, the age gap is closing. So please, again, don't make the old assumption that you're just going to be catering to single women. There are a lot of single men, and they have a different life skills deficit than single women. And that's going to be a growing market in the future as a lot of men are living longer.
Well, they are.
Susan, there's a couple questions here, if I could address maybe one of them
Yeah.
for the audience. For those who are concerned, Bob, I do know how to cook, so I have other life deficiencies. So a couple of things there. I know there was comments around slides, so those will be made available. There was a comment around long-term care contracts and that follow you to different settings, and yes, that can. The question I wanted to raise here, though, really for our group, says this: as the country becomes more diverse, how have organizations addressed the diverse cultural needs of this aging population? The desire of aging adults wanting to live amongst family and the idea of age apartheid was incredibly striking. So how are organizations handling this today?
Yeah. I think I know we don't have a lot of time, but I would say that I think COVID has forced us to focus on the issue of understanding our workforce, and how we think about understanding the culture and meeting the needs of our workforce is then going to be key. As our middle market study showed, our residents are going to be much more diverse in the future, in every sense of diversity. They're going to have even broader age spans, but they're going to be more diverse in terms of race and ethnicity than they've been in the past. It's not going to be, private pay senior living is not going to have a future as just appealing to the upscale white population served by people of color and immigrants. And so I think some of the lessons learned about how do you attract and retain staff are going to be important lessons to be learned in the future, where, for instance, we may have 4 generations, if not 5, serving residents in a building, including some of the residents paying down or paying forward by serving other residents. And so those issues are going, again, much to unpack there. But that's another huge change that's coming in our industry, Brian, that I don't think many, I mean, you see a few things now, communities that are really, aimed at Asian American culture or aimed at LBGT culture and so forth. But for the most part, we're not prepared for the change that's happening, but the lessons we've learned with staffing, I think, carry forward to thinking about community more broadly.
I think I think we're out of time, and really appreciate your participation today, and thank you all panelists for what has been a really great and important conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.